my fellow citizens, at this hour, American and coalition forces are in the early stages of military operations to disarm Iraq, to free its people, and to defend the world from grave danger. On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war. These are opening stages of what will be a broad and concerted campaign.
So that was President Bush announcing to the world in March of 2003 that the States were going to invade Iraq. What does the Iraq invasion, missing children, and give a little donations have in common? Empathy. And more specifically, they show us the fault in our empathy. And it's not what you think. It's not the lack of empathy they show. On the contrary, it's because of the wrong kind of empathy we do feel that's led to some not so good to some downright atrocious outcomes. I'm Harris, and I'm going to simplify the dark side of empathy. Now I know this video seems really loom and gloom, and it's gonna get worse before it gets better, but trust me, at the end I'm gonna share a way better approach. Now, just to begin with, let's first define empathy. Empathy means to put yourself in someone else's shoes and be able to feel what they feel. This is affective empathy. Put simply, when you feel empathy for someone, you feel their pain. And neuroscience studies actually show we do in fact feel people's pain. One experiment in particular did a study to measure the brain activity of two groups of people. The first group of people were electrocuted, tased, pricked, mildly of course, and looked at the brain activity, and the pain centers in their brains lit up. Now the second group of people, they were unharmed but had to watch the first group of people experience the electrocution, the pricking, and the brain activity showed the same activation in the same areas as the people who felt the physical pain. In other words, if you look at it from a primarily biological perspective, both groups are experiencing the same thing. So the saying that when you feel empathy for someone, you feel their pain is in fact true. In addition to that, another study looked at the consequence of feeling empathy for someone. Now this study looked at how the people who were feeling empathy and consequently the secondhand pain were able to help the people who they were feeling empathy for compared to people who weren't feeling empathy. And the results showed that people who felt empathy were feeling more distressed and were overcome by their personal distress from the empathy they experienced, that they were unable or less able to help the people who were actually experiencing the pain and suffering. So this in a way solidifies that feeling empathy for someone is, really feeling their pain. Dan Batson is an empathy scholar, and he did an experiment with a story about a little girl called Sherry Summers. Sherry Summers is a 7-year-old girl who's gonna die, and there's nothing you can do about it. There is a treatment though that she can get that will relieve her of her pain and suffering before her death. Problem is, she's really low to receive that treatment and behind other kids who have more severe conditions that can be saved and who are in more dire situations. So would you move Sherry up in line, knowing that by doing so you would move another child down in line? But when asked this question, the first group of participants were told to stay objective, and most of them chose to keep Sherry where she was in line. Now with the second group of people, they were told, hey, really put yourself in her shoes, feel her pain. And consequently, most of them chose to put Sherry at the top of the line. Now this experiment clearly shows how empathy can clash with our moral compass. Now we know that empathy doesn't really tell us what the right or wrong thing is to do, despite what we feel. So if it's not a moral compass, what is it then? Empathy is more of a spotlight. When we feel empathy, we put a spotlight on the person and things that we feel empathy towards. And the less people there are, the greater the spotlight is, and the more people there are, the less the spotlight. Experiments by Paul Slovic showed how the spotlight works. People were asked how much money they would donate to a girl who was living in absolute poverty in the third world country. When it was just her, there were a lot of high-level donations. In the second version of the story, they also added her brother. In the third version, they also added her brother and her mother, and so on until they got up to 8 relatives. And it showed that as the number of people increased in that story, the most that people would donate decreased, which is kind of counterintuitive, right? If more people need our help, we should donate more money, not less. But as you can see, the moral spotlight fades as more people grow into the story, consequently resulting into fewer donations. Now this leads perfectly into talking about GoFundMe, or for New Zealanders, Give a Little. These pages are full of mostly people who need help in some way to survive. Usually it's people who need, immediate funds for some things, for either medical or health treatments or lifestyle issues after natural disasters or accidents with the family, stuff like that. Now, these pages rely heavily on our empathy to fuel the donations. Otherwise, you wouldn't need all the background stories and the videos about these people who need help. Otherwise, these websites would be obsolete because we would just donate anyway. Now, this leads to a very uncomfortable idea. Do we want to help, or do we want to feel good and help? If you just want to help people, if you just want to help make the world a better place and help people in dire, life-threatening situations, then there are better, more efficient, and more effective ways to do it. Donating to charities who help children in third world countries, your money goes way further than it would if you just help one person or one family through the Give a Little or GoFundMe pages. But the consequence of donating to those charities in Africa, it's our inability to feel empathy, which fuels our lack of donations to that group. But technically, it would help way more. But I get it, and it's not a conscious choice. We help when we feel the urge to help. And that feeling is heightened through these stories that we see on GoFundMe and Give a Little. And don't get me wrong, helping either way is a good thing. If you're helping someone through the GoFundMe or Give a Little stories, you're still doing good. My question is, are you doing good because it makes you feel good? Because if that's the case, cool. Do that knowingly and consciously. But if you really want to do good, despite how you feel, and more overall good, there are better, more effective ways to do them. Now, moving on from donations, our empathy also creates biases in how we help. Now, in the West, as you can probably guess, there's a huge bias towards helping white people. There's a phenomenon called missing white girl syndrome. A 2010 study of news coverage of missing children showed that black children were severely underrepresented in the media compared to the national statistical averages. And missing white women were way higher in the totem pole of the coverage. Now, the thing with empathy is it's going to bias us towards people who are, one, closer to us, who relate more to us, and who are physically also close to us. Speaking of missing children, the 80s stranger danger phenomenon also had a similar connotation. Now, in the 80s, there was extensive coverage of missing people, and specifically missing white people and white women, which catalyzed this great concern of stranger danger. Some strangers are going to be out there who are going to kidnap us if we're not careful. Now, we felt the empathy from the news coverages, and as a consequence, parents chose to not let their kids out and be overprotective of what they did outside. Now, this stranger danger phenomenon is purely based on news media hysteria, because most missing children are simply runaways. That's right, they are simply runaways. And those who do get kidnapped and sexually abused, they're done by close relatives, not strangers. It is highly improbable for a stranger to kidnap your child. Basically, the empathy that the media created in us through the stories they told us substantiated a lot of fear and anxiety that really didn't help anyone and focused the issue on the wrong area and led to other perpetrators being able to do what they were doing this whole time. Empathy clouded our judgment. Empathy can also fuel violence and destruction, and I showed the video of Bush announcing to the world that he was going to invade Iraq. And Bush convinced the citizens of the US not through the fear, but instead he rode the fumes of empathy from 9/11. And he fueled the empathy by knowing that people would look back at 9/11 and see what happened and feel just rage from that and go, yeah, this is a good idea, let's invade Iraq. Now, Bush basically said that they would be freeing and saving the people of Iraq as well as the rest of the countries around the area by removing all the heavy armory that the military has, which was a complete lie. When Bush made that announcement, he had the support of most Americans, according to a lot of polls. Americans only felt that way because they were able to feel the pain of their country and of the people in New York when 9/11 happened. They didn't want that to happen to others. Okay, now let's look at empathy from a slightly different light. Do we need to feel empathy to be able to help people? Okay, let's get specific. Do I want my doctor to empathize with me? Now, if you think about empathy where the doctor feels my pain, then I don't know if I want him to feel my pain. Because if he does, then that might affect his stress levels, his thinking about an operation that he's going to go into. I want him to be as clear-headed as possible. And empathizing with me and feeling my pain might affect that. Fortunately, there is a better approach. This video can't all be loom and gloom without anything else to offer. What I'm going to give you next is a way better approach and a different type of empathy to use. Instead of using affective empathy, which is what we've been talking about so far, we need to use a combination of cognitive empathy and rational compassion. So what is cognitive empathy? Simply put, it is perspective taking. Being able to understand what someone is going through without feeling it with them. Now let's say I'm friends with a couple who just found out they will never be able to conceive a child. I could use affective empathy and feel their pain and be in a lot of distress with them, go, oh my god, this is terrible. What if I can't have children too? Shit. That isn't helpful. Now, by using cognitive empathy, I can understand that is a difficult position to be in without feeling it. I am not in that position, therefore I don't need to think about myself feeling it, and because that's not helpful. Instead, knowing how difficult it is for them and being there for them as they feel it is far more useful. Now, Brené Brown said this about empathy. Quote, "We need to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Rather than walking in their shoes, I need to learn how to listen to the story and believe them even when it doesn't match my experience. If my couple friend told me they couldn't have a baby, that wouldn't match any of the experiences that I've ever had. So I can't really walk in their shoes, but I can still understand how difficult they can be. And we need to combine that with rational compassion. First, let's define compassion. So compassion is the daily practice of recognizing and accepting our shared humanity so that we treat ourselves and others with loving kindness and taking action to face that suffering. So there's really three parts to understanding compassion. Now, the first is recognizing that we are equally human. Each one of us has our strengths and struggle, and none of us are immune to pain and suffering. It's really that recognition of the pain of our shared humanity. Now, number two, compassion isn't compassion if we don't take action. Now, taking action doesn't necessarily mean that we have to fix someone else's problem. Although it doesn't exclude that, if you can help someone in a tangible way to fix something tangible, objective in the real world, do that. But taking action in the name of compassion is helping someone work through their pain. The third part of rational compassion is the rationality part. It's understanding how your own biases can get in the way of you helping or feeling compassion for some people and not others, and how these biases can take away from your perspective taking unconsciously, resulting in the inability of realizing a shared humanity. So to summarize all of this up, affective compassion, feeling someone else's pain, is a super slippery slope, and feeling it and using that to gauge our judgments and our actions can be very dangerous. But there is a solution, and it is cognitive empathy, perspective taking, and rational compassion, realizing a shared humanity and taking action and helping people move through their pain. But that is pretty much it. Thank you for watching. I worked really hard on this video, so I hope you enjoy it. Again, like, share, and subscribe. It helps me with that algorithm, as you know by now. And I will see you again next time. Peace.